I call Alistair Scott.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it is a delight to stand in support of this bill, and very pleased to hear the Labour opposition also supporting this bill at this stage. Mr Speaker, it's the definition of zero-hour contracts, and I'll focus on that part of the bill, is often we're talking cross purposes, because no one really wants to have, no one wants to have a zero-hour contract where someone sits by the phone, is not compensated, has to wait around all day with the potential of getting 0 hours and not able to work anywhere else. That is an unacceptable situation. Mr Speaker, this bill does not allow that. Mr Speaker, this bill is a bill that supports in all its parts the employee, whether it's to do with paid parental leave, flexibility around paid parental leave. It recognises the changing nature of the workplace and the demands and the desirability of connecting the newborn baby with the mother. It recognises the tougher penalties and strengthens the enforcement of the labour laws. And it also, Mr Speaker, compels employers to keep better records so that they can be audited and penalties increased if they are not kept to the appropriate standard. But let me come back to the 0 hours contract. Mr Speaker, I'd rather call it, well, I do call it, a contract where one person is on call for another. And of course, if one's on call, whether it's a medical practitioner or a coffee grinder, it doesn't matter. This bill insists and ensures that there's compensation for making oneself available to the employer. So that is a fundamental change in the law. The other fundamental difference is that there is compensation again to the employee where there is a cancellation in the shift. And that is, of course, fair enough. And there must be a good reason for a restriction on the employee to not be able to work in another employer's business or in other employment situations. And I accept that what is reasonable notice and what is reasonable compensation is difficult to understand. I mean, Mr Lees-Galloway has already talked about the need for clarification on what is reasonable. And as the Minister has alluded to, or as Mr Lees-Galloway has alluded to, there are lots of things that must be considered. And part of the consideration is, of course, perhaps the nature, the type of business that one is involved with, whether it's a very specialist business or whether it's of a general nature. Perhaps a consideration as to what is reasonable might be the degree to which the employer can foresee or control the need to cancel the shifts. So if it's foreseeable and then it is cancelled, then one should be paying more than if it were not. The nature of the employee's work and the likely effect of a cancellation on the employee. So again, supporting the employee in this situation. That should be considered when determining what is reasonable. And perhaps the nature of the employee's work and employment arrangements, including where the guaranteed hours of work might be. So there are lots of things that need to be considered when one considers what is reasonable notice and what is reasonable compensation. And I look forward to seeing the SOPs come through and debating that in committee stage. And Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.